Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So this video is going to be my December wrap-up. I'm going to be discussing all of the books that I managed to read in the month of December. And December, surprisingly enough, has been one of my best reading months this year, which is kind of crazy because I work for the Postal Service and December is a crazy time of year for us. But I still managed to read a good number of books. However, as you will see, a lot of these books are relatively short, and that was on purpose because I knew I wouldn't have a ton of reading time. But I still managed to get a lot read. The only thing, for the channel, I've been slacking on videos. Not slacking, just I've been very busy at work, so I haven't had a lot of time to make videos, but I also didn't want to sacrifice reading time. So that's why the videos have been very sparse. I think maybe I've done like 3 or 4 videos in December. So I'm going to try to change that. I'm going to try to stick to my schedule of like 2 to 3 videos a week, like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, similar schedule as I've always done. But yeah, December is a crazy time for the Postal Service. But like I said, I did manage to read a fair amount in December. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. And of course, we've been trucking along with Night Shift for the Bookish Drummer Discord, our read-along that we've been doing for the Stephen King Short Story Book Club. We are now about halfway through, and let's see if I can remember which stories specifically we read in December. I think we read, what was it? The Boogeyman, Gray Matter, Battleground, Trucks, and Sometimes They Come Back. All of these have been very good so far, and of course, on my Discord channel, I have channels open for all of the stories in here that we've read so far, and we've just been having a blast reading all of these, and it's really fun to get people's reactions because so far, a lot of people's favorite short story is Battleground, and I would not have guessed that in a million years. And I'm glad that people enjoy it. It's just one that I did not see coming as like a lot of people's favorites. But yep, we've been trucking along with Night Shift, and yep, still having a blast. It's going to continue into February. Still not too late to join us because they're short stories. So you can just kind of pick and choose whatever you want. But yep, that's been a staple. And then I'm going to try to go in order of books that I read. So like at the start of December to the end of the month, which I've read recently. And the first thing that I decided to read was Dave Grohl, the Storyteller. This is basically his autobiography or memoir, whatever you want to call it. I recently picked up this hardcover, but when I originally read it, I did the audiobook only. And it's narrated by Dave Grohl, so I had a very fun time listening to that. Not a perfect book, like I said, I had a great time reading it, but at the same time, I wanted him to go more in depth about the music, and there's lots of moments in his life that I wanted him to focus on, like with Nirvana and the death of Kurt Cobain, and the forming of Foo Fighters, and like the making of music with Foo Fighters, and then all of the various side projects that he's done with like Them Crooked Vultures and performing on Queens of the Stone Age's first album. Like I wanted him to go more in depth about that, but really it's called The Storyteller, so it's a lot of stories just from his life, his personal life. And while most of them were good, a lot of them I felt could have been cut out, and they could have been he could have inserted way more music stuff in here, which is normally my main complaint with musical biographies. Like, you had a cool life, but I want you to talk about your music. And obviously, Dave Grohl is a phenomenal drummer and a very good frontman for the Foo Fighters. Not necessarily one of my all-time favorite musicians, but he's a cool dude and very talented. And so I had a very fun time listening to the audiobook. And I went to Barnes & Noble because they had like a 50% off sale hardcovers. And the reason I wanted to pick this up, even though it's not like a all-time favorite, is because this book is littered with like pictures. So I'm going to be looking through all of these. So yeah, The Storyteller, I gave 4 stars. Pretty good start for the month. And then the next book I decided to pick up, completely different. Taylor Jenkins Reid, surprising no one. One True Loves. And I will say, this book did end the 5-star streak. I did read 4 books in a row by her that I gave 5 stars that I absolutely loved. This one, it was very good. I gave 4.5 stars. I had a couple complaints. Like, there's one chapter in particular that's written in second person for seemingly no reason. And it kind of threw me for a loop because I was reading it and I was like, wow, this is going on for a long time and it's still in second person. What is happening? And then there's like one thing at the very end where I'm just like, okay, that's kind of a leap. But, it was still just fantastic writing from Taylor Jenkins Reid, as always. And I really enjoyed the characters. But overall, it is my least favorite of her work so far. But still very good. 4.5 stars. And then going in a completely different direction yet again, also surprising no one, Stephen Graham Jones, Night of the Mannequins, a horror novella. I had a blast reading this, and of course, since it's a novella, I read it in one sitting, in like a couple hours maybe, and very dark, but also very funny. I was not expecting it to be a very funny book, but it had laugh out loud moments where I'm just like, this is ridiculous. Just like the character's like logic of like why he's doing it is insane. And I just had a blast reading this. 5 stars, and possibly one of the best, if not my favorite, Stephen Graham Jones, just anything. Because I love most of the man's writing, and he's quickly becoming one of my favorite horror writers. So Night of the Mannequins gets 5 stars from me. And then a little bit of a disappointment, which was a gift from my very good friend Sharon Dwyer, Scratches by Joshua Marcella. Now, I gave this book 3 stars, and while it's, it wasn't perfect and it wasn't like an all-time favorite for me, it still had some good moments. Now, this is another short horror novella, and this is actually a debut. So I wasn't expecting it to be perfect by any means, but it was still kind of rough on the edges. And my main complaint isn't necessarily with the writing or like the story or the characters. It's just one of those things where it's like, it's a novella and it's at that weird novella length where like it either should have been fleshed out more to like a longer novella, or it could have been condensed to where it would have been like a really impactful short story. But the way it's written here, it just felt very clunky because there's like 80 pages, but there's also like 20 chapters, so it's very clunky. But I am interested in trying out the sequel to this, but which I'm not. I don't know if it's already out. I think it's already out, and I'll eventually try it. But I am interested to try more by this author. And like I said, it is a debut, so I wasn't expecting it to be perfect by any means, but a little underwhelmed. 3-star book, not perfect, but also not terrible. It's decent. And then the next book, also going in a new, different direction. That's kind of a theme here, I guess. Nights from the Midnight Driver, by Jordan Sonneblick, and you guys might recognize that name because he wrote one of my all-time favorite books, Drums, Girls, and Dangerous Pie. This is a middle grade book, and unlike Drums, Girls, and Dangerous Pie, which I had reread several times, I don't think I've reread this since middle school. Maybe high school. Maybe I reread it in high school. But yeah, I had forgotten most of this, and I was pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed it the second or third time, either way. I haven't read it in over a decade. And I very much enjoyed this, and I've completely forgotten that the main character is a guitar player. And I also kind of forgot that the main character protagonist from Drums, Girls, and Dangerous Pie shows up in this book. And that was a pleasant surprise. And this book was also very good, but also for a middle grade book, very hard hitting. There's some scenes in here towards the end of the book where you're like, oh man, this author's not. It was very good. 5 stars, of course, and not quite on the same level as Drums, Girls, and Dangerous Pie, but I believe now, since it's kind of an indirect sequel to Drums, Girls, and Dangerous Pie, I'm going to reread Drums, Girls, and Dangerous Pie and this one every year just because they go well together. So, yep, Notes from the Midnight Driver, 5 stars. And then, shifting gears yet again, we have Of Sand and Malice Made by Bradley P. Bulio. And this was actually a fun read because it's a novella that takes place in one of my all-time favorite fantasy series, Song of the Shattered Sands. And with the first book being 12 Kings and Cherokee, this is actually a prequel to 12 Kings and Cherokee. And like I said, it's a novella, so it's very short. I read it in one sitting, or maybe 2, I think 1. But it was very good, although since my main issue with prequels is that the stakes aren't very high because since it's a prequel, you already know that they're going to be fine. So, like, it was enjoyable because the characters were great, and I love the setting, and the plots are usually very good, but the stakes weren't very high. But it was still enjoyable, so I gave it 4 stars, and maybe not something I necessarily want to reread over and over again, but it would be fun to revisit it every now and then. But, yeah, so Of Sand and Malice Made, 4 stars, pretty good fantasy novella. And then jumping into more fantasy, a little bit more on the dense side, I will say. Gardens of the Moon by Steven Erickson. Now, this is actually a reread for me. I read this years and years ago when I was trying to first get into Malazan. And I had heard a lot of people on the interweb say that the first book was by far the worst. And every time I looked up rankings, like, this was always dead last. And then books 2 and 3 were always at the very top. So I was a little hesitant to try it out. But the first time I read it, I was pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. My problem with the series was the second and the third book. And I was like, these aren't as good as the first one. What the hell? And then I kind of quit the series. But in 2022, one of my main goals is to try to read all of Malazan, which I know is very taxing. I don't know if I'll be able to finish all of it, but I can definitely get a good chunk in there. And I was supposed to read this in January, actually. But I was like, why not? I kind of needed a new change of pace in December, so I decided to pick it up early, and I kind of liked it pretty much exactly the same as the first time I read it. I was like, yeah, it's pretty good, 4 stars. And now knowing more about the series and the second book and how it kind of shifts into different characters, into different themes, into different environments, like, I think I'll be more prepared to enjoy it than I was the first time. Because the first time I was like, what the hell is going on? But yeah, it was a decent read. 4 stars. And then we've got our Christmas-themed book, which was kindly gifted to me by my good friend Joanna from the channel, Joanna, and she really got me into Brahm, which she recommended me The Child Thief, and I really enjoyed that. So I was anxious to try this one out, and Krampus did not disappoint. I actually liked this even more than The Child Thief. I gave this one 5 stars, and while the characters might not be as good and as interesting as the ones in The Child Thief, I think this one was a much better plot and much better paced, and just the story was so much fun. It's basically Krampus versus Santa Claus, and it was a wild ride. It was awesome. I very much enjoyed it, and of course, the added bonus of it being narrated by Kirby Hayborn. Love Kirby Hayborn. Y'all know that by now. Yes, Krampus was awesome. 5 stars. Oh, yeah, and I'm sure I forgot an audiobook that I read because I don't have a physical copy. I read it somewhere in the middle of all that I just said. It's Penance, and for the life of me, I can't remember the author's name, but it's the same author as Confessions, which I'm going to be reading in February. Penance was decent. It was fine. It was a 3.5 star read, and I actually think listening to the audiobook may have hindered my ability to enjoy it to its fullest extent, because the way the book is written, it's written in 6 chapters, and they're all different perspectives. They're all different people in the story, kind of telling their side of the tale. But the problem with the audiobook is that it's the same narrator for each chapter, so the characters don't sound as distinct as they probably should. Whereas if I was reading it physically, I probably would have done that on my own, and I probably would have read better. But even to that extent, like, it was good, but it got very, what's the word? It got, not repetitive, but like formulaic. Because like basically the chapters would start out and they're kind of mundane, and then you get to the end of the chapter and there's like a big reveal, and you're like, oh crap. But that was like every chapter. I'm just like, okay, I'm kind of just waiting for it now. But the reveals were pretty good. It was fine though. Like, I gave it 3.5 stars. I hear from people that have read Penance and Confessions that Confessions is much better. So I'm definitely anticipating Confessions being very good, while Penance, it was fine. Like, it was 3.5 stars. It was good. And then we're going to probably the most disappointing book of December. Probably disappointing a few people, but I'm going to go with Red Rising by Pierce Brown. Now, I had known ahead of time that for a lot of people, this is the weakest book in the trilogy and the series in general. So I went into it knowing that, like, okay, it's not going to be perfect. Like, it's going to be a decent book. But for me, I'll be honest, I struggled with most of this book. I gave it 2.5 stars, and that might be generous, maybe. But my problem with the book is that it actually starts out really good. Like, part 1, which is kind of short, it's like 50 pages, I actually really liked. And then you get to the part 2 and part 3, and then so on and so forth. And going into this book, I really was in the dark for like what this book was actually about, and learning like the main premise and like understanding like what the character has to do. I was just like, really, like, this is what we're doing right now. And I really didn't like the main character, Darrow. Is that his name? Yeah, Darrow. I was kind of indifferent about him. And the other characters, the side characters, weren't too great. I think there was a guy named Severo. He was pretty good, but other than that, this whole book was kind of just meh. Like, it was fine. It wasn't great. But I know that so many people love the second and the third book, which is why I kind of pushed through this. And I'm going to be reading Golden Sun in February. and I'm anticipating it being, well, it's got to be better than this, because I really struggled with this book, guys. 2.5 stars, very meh, and yeah, let's just push that aside. And then these last books, top notch. And this book is 5 stars for me, and you'll see why. Game of Thrones. It's a reread for me. I think it's either the 3rd or 4th time I've read this book at this point. And I flew through this. Once you've read these books, like the first time you read it, it can be a little jarring to get used to the writing style. But like the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th times, man, I just fly through this book. I just put it on audio at like 1.6, 1.7 speed, and I can just get through it very quickly and just fall in love with the story and the characters and George's writing. I love this series. It's my favorite series of all time. And yes, Game of Thrones is definitely one of the, well, I mean, there's only 5 books, but I always struggle with like how to rank them. Like number 3 is definitely my favorite. Clash of Kings, probably my least favorite, even though they're all 5 stars. But then 1, 4, and 5, I always struggle with how I want to rank them. I know a lot of people would probably put this as number 2, and then a lot of people kind of shit on books 4 and 5, but I love books 4 and 5. They were really great, especially watching them after watching the first 4 seasons and then reading books 4 and 5, not knowing what the hell was going to happen. Like, those were so fun to read. But yeah, anyway, I could talk about A Song of Ice and Fire all day, people. Game of Thrones, 5 stars. Surprising absolutely no one. And then, one of my favorite books that I've read this month and just the year in general. For anyone who knows me, I love classic rock. My favorite band of all time is Led Zeppelin. I'm a drummer, of course. My all-time favorite drummer, John Henry Bonham. And I read his new biography, Beast. I had a blast reading this book, and I learned a lot. I already knew a lot about Led Zeppelin's history and about John Bonham in general, but I learned a lot of tidbits that were very amusing and very sad, and I had a very fun time reading this book. One of the best, if not the best, like musical biographies I've ever read, and I've read some pretty damn good ones. I really enjoyed this one. A very good way to end the year. But it's kind of the last thing that I've been reading on and off for like the past few days to kind of like solidify the end of the year is George R. R. Martin Dream Songs, Volume 1. Now, if you guys don't know the story, Stephen King, who I talk about a lot on my channel, obviously, he used to be my all-time favorite author, and then George R. R. Martin, after I finished A Song of Ice and Fire, was my second favorite author. And I always wanted to put him in my number 1 spot because I loved A Song of Ice and Fire. But at that point in my life, I had only read 5 books by George, and I had read like 30 or 40 Stephen King books. I was like, the math's a little wonky here. But after going back and learning that George wrote a bunch of books and short stories and novellas in the 70s and 80s that kind of, they were popular a little bit in the time for like the sci-fi crowd, but obviously not very well known at all by today's standards. I read all of that, and I absolutely fell in love with his sci-fi and his older works. And yeah, that's the main reason why he shot up to number 1. And so I've kind of just been reading a handful of stories and novellas in here. I've read a few already, and The Second Kind of Loneliness is quite possibly my favorite short story of all time. I've read it maybe like 4 or 5 times, and it's just incredible. And A Song for Elia, one of the best novellas, and I still want to read before the year's end a few more. Meat House Man, The Way of Cross and Dragon, Sand Kings, and Night Flyers. And yes, so I'm going to be reading these for the next couple of days before the start of January. And yeah, that's the last thing I'm going to be reading for the year. A definite good way to end my reading year of 2021. All right, so those are all of the things that I managed to read in the month of December. And like I said, normally December is not a good reading month for me personally because of my job. Last year, I actually only managed to finish, I think, one book. Like last year was even crazier because it was like, not only was it Christmas, but it was like COVID, just people were ordering packages like crazy. I had no downtime, and I was, in any kind of downtime I did have, I didn't want to read because I was tired. But this month really surprised me with how much I managed to get read, even though, like I've said, a lot of these were like smaller books, like novellas and like even a middle grade book and very short fiction. I'm proud of myself because I managed to read a lot. I haven't been able to film a lot, but I'm kind of remedying, can't say that word. I've remedied that. And I've just filmed a bunch of videos the past few days while I've had a couple days, rare December days off of work, and I've managed to film like 6 or 7 videos, so you guys will be getting a good amount of videos, at least at the start of the year. And yeah, and again, those are all of the books I read in December, and really this year has been a very good reading year for me. Definitely better than last year. Last year was kind of rough for me. I think I managed to finish like 50 some books last year. I think I've doubled it this year. I think I'm at 110 books and pretty close to 50,000 pages, which is crazy. Anyway, please let me know if you guys have read any of these books and what you thought of them, whether you loved them or hate them, or you thought they were kind of meh. I love that word, meh. But yeah, let me know, and also let me know what your favorite books of December have been, and I'd be interested in reading about that down in the comments below. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and to the Bookish Drummer Discord. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and have a fantastic rest of the year and a happy new year.